Chris Kamrani writes for The Athletic, covers Utah football and stuff for The Athletic, but took his drive a week early down to Provo. He'll be down there next Thursday. Was down there yesterday, too. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Bill. How we doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm just thinking about Week 0 games, and I think we need to put a little bug in Kyle's ear about a Week 0 game to Hawaii next year. Just saying. Or in the next couple of years.
I'm all for that, and I think for you, too, you could do a lot of enterprising stories about guys like, Bradley and I. You better go out at least a week early to do some feature stories on some of those guys, and, Darnell Arsenault, who went to St. Louis High Schools, guys like that. I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, and I think I could save the company money by just sleeping on the beach. I'll just take a tent with me, and I'll just, hoof it.
I think that's a good idea. A little Week 0 game to Hawaii for Utah football. It'd be like the old WAC days. Kyle used to go over when he was with BYU. Utah used to go over and play them, too. So it'd be like going back in time.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I'd be fascinated to see how they would prepare for a game like that. Beyond the obvious distractions that come with playing in Hawaii, I can't imagine going back in time and playing 4 hours behind your normal time schedule.
Yeah, I mean, they go a day early now to go to, like, the East Coast. Like, the rare game a few years ago, they went to Pittsburgh. We flew out there on, like, a Thursday instead of a Friday. Hawaii's just a different animal, and that team's so different, too. There is an inherent advantage with the travel, and especially teams that only come out a day early, the jet lag and everything else.
Yeah, it would be definitely one of those trips where I would lobby. Let's just say that. So we're gonna try to keep that in the periphery going forward.
So what did you discover on your week early trip down to Provo yesterday when you talked to some folks and kind of got a vibe for what BYU was doing?
Yeah, it was. They're locked in the way Utah says they're locked in. I was able to talk to former Austin Lee yesterday. Great interview, great kid. Just talking about, he's one of those guys that has, both sides of the rivalry going back in his blood. His dad played baseball at the U. His grandpa played football at the U. He came to the U after his mission. Now he's down at BYU, and he's going to be part of that defense this year. And, I think they're not making any bones about it. I think they want to snap this streak, and rightfully so. I think they have a game at Lavelle Edwards Stadium that hasn't been sold out that often the last few years. I would imagine that we'll see that 65,000 or whatever the max capacity is next Thursday against Utah.
What was there? You say they're locked in. Was there anything aside from just saying we're locked in? Did you get any kind of feel for talking to some of those guys, or is it just a lot of the same stuff you get when you're up at Utah too?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of tough because they don't want to give the bulletin board fodder, and I get that. They're trying to toe the line a little bit, and that's wise on their part. I just think that they just want to, like I said, snap this thing, and they have Utah and BYU on their scoreboard inside Lavelle Edwards Stadium, and it's there. So they're clearly getting ready for this thing. It's going to be interesting to see how the Utah defense gets after Zach Wilson. We've heard a lot about his shoulder surgery in the offseason. He looks good. He looks healthy. Everybody says he's healthy, but I think you and I were talking about it last week. I think that game last year got their attention up at Rice Eccles, and I'm interested to see if that defense comes out a little fired up.
Yeah, I don't think I don't say it's an excuse, but I think it's a reason. I mean, to me, I don't like making excuses unless your star player goes down in the middle of a game. It's not an excuse. Utah, whether they overlooked them or didn't overlook them, or we're looking ahead into the Pac-12 championship game, well, then that's shame on Utah. That's a them issue. BYU came out and played really, really well, but I do think that was part of it. I think that having played them 4 games ago, and the fact that it's the first game of the year, and very rarely does anybody ever overlook the first game of the year when it's not a 1AA team, I think both teams will be very dialed into this game, Chris.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of this game, kind of along the lines of what you're saying, is that it's the first game. It would be a slog for us if we had to get Idaho State week 1 and then had to, everybody keeping their eyes to week 2 against BYU down in Provo. I think the fact that we're kicking the season off with this game just kind of leads to the happiness that this fall camp is over with and we're ready to get going. But yeah, it's next week's going to be a fascinating development. How does Andy Ludwig's offense look the first few drives? Is that Utah defense pissed off the way Zach Wilson made them look for 3 quarters last year? We'll see.
I said this earlier today, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it over the next week. I think the unit that's got the most pressure on it next Thursday night is BYU's defense, because I don't think BYU's offense is going to put up huge numbers against that Utah defense. I think that they can try and run it and slow it down, but I don't think that offense of BYU's is what I would call dynamic. At least I haven't seen it. They don't appear to be dynamic on paper. They've got some guys. Zach Wilson's very good, but I'm not sure who the guys around him are. Utah's got some dynamic weapons, Zach Moss, Tyler Hunt. I think the most pressure is going to be on that BYU defense to keep that Utah offense slowed down, to keep it a low. Because I don't think if it's a high-scoring game, that favors BYU. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, conversely, it might take some pressure on Zach to keep drives sustained to make sure that BYU defense gets a breather. Because if they're out on the field for long, sustained drives, the kind of drives that I'm sure Andy Ludwig and the Utah offense want to sustain and kind of wear them down, then they're going to be in for a long night. But I agree that the test will be how that BYU defense stacks up against this Utah offense, because I don't think you're going to see a lot of 3-and-outs, the sort of 3-and-outs, let's say, that you did last year against BYU. I'm going to venture a guess and say that Utah will be in more 3rd and manageables versus 3rd and 8s and 3rd and 9s.
Yeah, I think Tyler and Zach playing will help that. That was still very early on in the Jason Shelley development, and Armand Shine is clearly not Zach Moss. So I agree with you there. I'm also really curious, too, to see how Andy Ludwig, who knows this game, he's coached in this game before, and he said to other people, you know, I've had good athletes here, but I haven't had these kind of athletes like I have now here. I'm very curious to see how he decides to come out. Does he just try and ram Zach Moss down their throat, or does he try and come out and give them a lot of different looks? That's a curious part of this chess game for me, too, because, again, Andy's coached in this game before. He's gone as a favorite and in an underdog against BYU. I'm very curious to see what he does.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, because I think you could make an argument that BYU's defensive line is pretty good. So I'm not saying that Utah's going to be able to run the ball at will against those guys last year. I know Armand isn't Zach, but, you know, BYU did a pretty good job in the trenches against Utah in that game last year. So I would expect them to be ready. And they have a guy in Kamrani who knows Kyle. He knows, you know, Andy. These guys know each other, and I think that just adds to the layers and the dynamics of this game, is that everybody knows each other so well. So it's going to be kind of the ultimate chess match. I would expect Andy to stay on the ground and assert himself early on. That would be my guess, but who knows? I mean, maybe they come out and throw 3 in a row, and, you know, if they go 3 and out, they go 3 and out, or they move the ball, and then they can kind of go from there. We'll see.
Yeah, I would be surprised if they did that per se, but maybe they will. I think based on Kyle and Andy's history, he might want to run that ball just a little bit. I'm curious. You've written some really fun stories. I read the one last night about the secondary, the fastest secondary. Could be a track team if they wanted them to be a track team and things like that. Well, so far through camp, and you have the luxury of not having to cover it like a normal beat guy does. You can find some unique stuff. What's been your favorite story through camp that you've written so far?
I think I'd have to go with the Niumatalolo scholarship reveal story, only because it just came together so quickly, and getting to know the nuts and bolts and kind of the behind-the-scenes stuff of how that kind of permeates and then eventually comes to fruition is really cool. You know, I was able to talk to some folks on the creative team up at Utah, and it's fascinating to see their thought process and how they kind of work with Kyle on these things. And sometimes Kyle has the ideas, other times, you know, his team has ideas. And it was really cool also being able to talk to Coach Niumatalolo out at Navy about, you know, how excited he was to be part of this reveal. And just him and his wife were the only ones who knew. They didn't even tell their kids. They didn't even tell Eli's siblings because they were afraid that they would spill the beans. So for me, that was probably the coolest one, just because it's a unique non-fall camp type story, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I completely do. I enjoyed that. I told you I enjoyed that one a great deal the other day. I thought the Jordan Wilmore story was interesting, too, and Jordan, you know, really, it reminded me a little bit, Chris. I don't know, I don't remember if you were on the beat or not, but back when Jalen Johnson was recruited, and you may have written about Jalen, too, since you've been on there, but you know, the job he did, I mean, he's a very unique cat. I know it, too, because he interned for us this summer. This is a really smart kid who's had basically a 5-year plan all the way through, and he was really careful in his recruitment of who he went to. And when he got here, he said he was going to graduate early and go early to the NFL, and he's done all that stuff. Wilmore was kind of the same way. And I don't know if that was the influence from the outside and people telling him what to do, but he seemed very particular in his recruitment and had an idea of what he wanted to do the whole way.
Yeah, and I think landing Jordan is kind of a byproduct of the way Kyle wants to play. I don't know if you land Jordan Wilmore if you're a team that spreads the ball around and wants to throw 40 times a game. So I think Jordan saw from afar what Utah is, and I think you see a guy like Zach Moss do what he does, and before Zach, Joe Williams, and before Joe, Devontae Booker. I think Utah's kind of developing this pipeline in a sense of being able to produce every down backs, and I think if you want to be that guy, this is a school that you can go to. And Jordan was committed to USC for a long time, and it was his hometown school, but they've had a lot of turmoil over there, especially on the offensive side of the ball in recent years. And it was interesting to hear him talk about, not specifically to USC, but about the recruiting process. And he was pretty frank, and he was saying that, you kind of have to see through people's BS, for lack of a better term. And he talked to his buddy Khalil Tate, who he knows pretty well about what Khalil's recruitment process was like. So just being able to kind of peel the onion a little bit and get to see what these guys really think about stuff is always fun. And you're always appreciative when they're straight up with you.
Yeah, he was good, and I think he's probably really happy now that he didn't choose SC since they've gone to that air raid 5 wide receiver. Not that they don't run the ball in that, but you're not going to get 25 carries a game at USC anymore, not if they stick with this air raid.
Well, especially considering the amount of talent they have at receiver, too. I mean, they're 3 or 4 deep with NFL guys for sure. So I think it's wise. It was wise for Clay to hire Graham Harrell and bring him in because you're going to be able to capitalize on guys who are going to be really good this year and will be very good at the next level. But I totally agree that whoever's the running back this year, Stephen Carr, I don't even know who it is, they'll get their fair share of carries, but it's not going to be anything close to 25, 30 a game.
Hey, before I let you go, you spent a little time in Provo yesterday. You've been up with the Utes all through fall camp. Either side, give me the biggest question you have a week out for that game.
For me right now, it's Utah's offense. I think we've heard all kind of ad nauseum this fall camp about how much everybody loves Andy's looks and approach, and Tyler said he's learning more than he's ever learned from any coach that he's ever had on the offensive side of the ball. Can Utah just deliver and be the team that everybody's assumed, not dominate, but take it to a team that they should beat, frankly? I mean, if Utah is going to be talked about winning the Pac-12 and going to the Rose Bowl or even having a dark horse shot at the college football playoffs, this is a game where they shouldn't only win, they should probably win handily. But, again, it's a rivalry game, and BYU knows them well, and Kamrani knows them well. And as we've seen, outside of 54-10, this game is always crazy.
It is.